Hello, my name is Linda, and I'm 31 years old. For many years, I thought I had a fantastic relationship with my mother-in-law, Melissa. From the very first time we met, she greeted me with a warm smile and kind words that made me feel welcomed into her family. She often complimented me, asked about my hobbies, and even expressed excitement about the future Scott and I were building together. I truly believed she cared for me as if I were her own daughter. But I was wrong. Beneath her friendly facade, Melissa had been quietly stirring conflict between Scott and me. Her actions were subtle at first, almost unnoticeable. It wasn't until things started unraveling that I began to see the truth. Melissa's frequent calls to Scott started out as innocuous. It made sense that a mother would want to check in on her son regularly. I never thought much of it, even when the calls became a daily routine. After all, I was at work most of the time, and it wasn't like they were disrupting our time together, or so I thought. But over the weeks, Scott's demeanor began to shift. He became distant, often distracted during our conversations. His once warm and affectionate nature cooled, and a tension I couldn't quite place began to settle between us. At first, I chalked it up to stress. We were, after all, in the middle of launching a new business, a significant undertaking for any couple. However, it wasn't long before Scott's behavior escalated. He started snapping at me over trivial matters, and some of his comments carried an edge of bitterness that stung more than I cared to admit. One evening, after enduring days of his cold shoulder, I couldn't take it any longer. "Scott, is something wrong?" I asked, trying to keep my tone calm despite the storm of emotions swirling within me. "You've been acting differently lately." He barely glanced up from his phone, his response curt and defensive. "I'm fine, Linda, just leave me alone. Isn't that what you want?" His words cut me like a blade. I stared at him, struggling to process the hostility in his tone. "What do you mean?" I asked, my voice trembling. "Why would you say that?" Scott finally looked at me, his expression a mixture of frustration and pain. "You're just planning to take all my money and leave, aren't you?" he said bitterly. The accusation was so outrageous, so far from the truth, that I was momentarily speechless. "Scott," I said after a pause, my voice barely above a whisper, "how could you think that? Where is this even coming from?" He sighed deeply, his shoulders slumping as if the weight of his words had finally caught up with him. Sitting down in the nearest chair, he buried his face in his hands. For a moment, the room was silent, save for the ticking of the clock on the wall. When he finally spoke, his voice was tinged with regret. "I'm sorry, Linda, I shouldn't have said that. It's just, something's been weighing on me." I knelt beside him, placing a hand gently on his knee. "Scott, we're a team," I said softly. "Whatever it is, we'll figure it out together. Please, just tell me what's going on." After what felt like an eternity, he looked at me, his eyes filled with guilt. "It's my mom," he admitted. "She's been saying things about you, that made me question everything." His words hit me like a freight train. Melissa, the woman I had come to see as a second mother? I couldn't believe it. "What kind of things?" I asked, dreading the answer. Scott hesitated before speaking, as if ashamed to repeat her claims. "She's been saying that you're only with me for the money," he said finally, his voice low, "that you're planning to take over the business we're building and leave me with nothing." I felt like the ground had been ripped out from beneath me. "That's absurd," I said, my voice shaking with a mixture of anger and disbelief. "I just talked to Melissa last week about our plans. She was so supportive. Why would she say something like that?" Scott shook his head, his expression conflicted. "I didn't want to believe her," he admitted, "but she sounded so convincing, and the more she said it, the more it got into my head. That's why I've been acting the way I have. I'm sorry, Linda, I didn't know what to believe." Taking a deep breath, I forced myself to stay calm. As hurt and angry as I was, I knew lashing out wouldn't solve anything. "Scott, this can't continue," I said firmly. "We need to address this, together." He looked at me warily. "What do you mean?" "We need to hear what Melissa is saying firsthand," I explained. "The next time she calls, let me listen in. Set it up so I can join the call without her knowing. That way, we'll know the truth." Scott hesitated, clearly uncomfortable with the idea, but eventually, he nodded. "Okay," he said, "if nothing else, this will give us some clarity." And so, with heavy hearts and a shared determination, we set our plan into motion, ready to uncover the truth and confront the web of deceit Melissa had woven between us. I needed to be sure. Seeing the pain in Scott's eyes reminded me of the toll this situation was taking on him. I realized I'd been so consumed by my own hurt that I hadn't fully considered the emotional struggle he was enduring. Okay, I'll hold off on confronting her for now, I said reluctantly. Thank you, Linda, Scott replied, his voice a mixture of relief and gratitude. Taking a deep breath, I picked up the phone. My tone was guarded, but I was determined to remain calm. Hello, my dear. How are you? Melissa's voice carried its usual sugary sweetness, but this time it only fueled my resolve. I'm fine, Melissa. And you? I responded, keeping my voice measured. She seemed momentarily taken aback by my cool demeanor, but she quickly recovered. I wasn't ready to confront her outright just yet, but I couldn't resist dropping a hint that I was no longer oblivious. I wanted her to feel the shift, to sense that her schemes weren't as hidden as she thought. Oh, darling, you sound upset. Is everything all right? She asked, her tone dripping with feigned concern. Actually, I've been a bit troubled, Melissa, I replied smoothly. I've recently come across some shocking information. Her voice tightened slightly. What kind of information, dear? Well, I said, choosing my words carefully, it seems someone has been spreading lies about me, cruel, baseless accusations. I can't fathom why anyone would stoop so low. How awful, Melissa murmured, attempting to sound sympathetic. Yes, it is, I agreed, letting my tone grow sharper. Have you ever encountered someone who would harm another's reputation for no apparent reason? Perhaps out of jealousy or malice? The silence that followed was brief but telling. Melissa seemed to scramble for a response. Well, dear, this has been quite a lot to take in. I'm suddenly feeling tired. Let's continue this conversation tomorrow, she said hastily before hanging up. Before I could even process her abrupt exit, Scott's phone buzzed with a new notification. It was a text from Melissa. Got another update on your slimy wife. Turns out I'm not the only one who sees through her. Someone else has been talking about her too. You need to get out of this mess while you can. I'll call tomorrow while she's at work to tell you everything. We were both stunned. Scott's expression darkened as he read the message, and the remaining doubt he'd harbored about his mother's intentions seemed to evaporate. We need to stop her, Linda, he said, his voice steady but filled with anger. It's horrifying to think she would go to such lengths to destroy us, I replied, my heart heavy with a mix of outrage and sorrow. Scott nodded firmly. She's my mother, but this is wrong. She can't get away with this. That night, as we sat together, supporting each other through the storm, our bond only grew stronger. The ordeal had shaken us, but also reaffirmed our commitment to each other. The next day, we set our plan into motion. While I was at work, Scott initiated a call with Melissa, this time adding me to the conversation via conference call without her knowledge. As expected, Melissa wasted no time spinning her fabrications once their usual pleasantries were exchanged. Oh, Scott, what a day I've had, she began dramatically. You wouldn't believe the things I've heard about her. Embezzling funds, bribing officials, it's truly disgraceful. And you know me, I've been trying to protect you all along. Is that so, Melissa? I interjected, my voice calm but cutting. There was a sharp intake of breath on her end of the line. Linda? What are you doing on this call? Listening, I replied simply. And believe me, it's been enlightening. Caught off guard, Melissa faltered. There must be some misunderstanding. I cut her off. Enough, Melissa. I've heard everything over the past few weeks. The lies, the manipulation, the attempts to drive a wedge between Scott and me. It's over. I don't know what you think you heard, but, she began, her voice rising with panic. Don't insult me by pretending to be innocent, I snapped. Your schemes have failed. Scott and I see right through you, and we won't tolerate your deceit any longer. The silence on her end was deafening. Scott spoke up, his voice resolute. Mom, I love you, but this has to stop. You've caused enough pain. If you can't respect my marriage, we'll have to distance ourselves. Melissa stammered, trying to regain control of the conversation, but it was futile. Scott and I had drawn a line, and there was no going back. As the call ended, Scott took my hand, his grip firm and reassuring. We had faced the truth together, and though the road ahead might be difficult, we knew we'd weather it side by side.